My name is Ethan Carter. I'm 29 years old, and for as long as I can remember, my family has treated me like background noise, not the problem child, not the star, just the steady one. The one who'd be fine no matter what, which really meant they never had to look too closely. All the attention, the speeches, the framed photos on the hallway wall, they were reserved for my older brother, Blake, and whatever milestone he was celebrating that month. Promotions, bonuses, future partner whispers. My role was simple: show up, clap, don't complicate the narrative. This Christmas was supposed to be about him again. My mom called it a little celebration for your brother's big promotion. Not Christmas dinner, not family night, his night. What they didn't know was that 3 weeks earlier, I'd wired more money into my account than my entire family had ever seen combined. They didn't know the side project they used to smirk at the emergency response platform I built between night shifts had just been acquired for $186 million. I sat at that table staring at the carved ham and cheap holiday wine, listening to them talk about Blake like he'd built the skyline himself. Then he made one comment too many about my ambulance salary and my cute little tech hobby. So I looked at him and said, calm as I could, I sold my company. He laughed. For how much? $186 million. Before I tell you what happened next and why I walked out of that house differently than I walked in, drop a comment with the time where you are and where you're watching from. I want to see how far stories like this travel. Growing up in my house meant understanding one thing early. There was a ranking system. Blake was first. I wasn't second. I was just stable, reliable, low maintenance. Blake threw touchdowns under Friday night lights. His name echoed through stadium speakers while my parents stood in the bleachers like royalty. My dad kept newspaper clippings in a folder labeled Blake Achievements. My mom learned the stats of every game. The year I won first place at the State Engineering Expo for designing a small-scale emergency routing model. My ribbon ended up in a kitchen drawer next to expired coupons. Ethan doesn't need the spotlight, my mom used to say. He's independent. It sounded like praise. It wasn't. It meant they didn't look closely. When Blake decided to major in finance, my parents talked about legacy, vision, big futures. My dad started introducing him to important friends before he even graduated. When I chose to train as a paramedic, my mom smiled politely. That's good, honey. Solid job. People always need that. Solid. Practical. Safe. Blake's career was described as high ceiling. Mine was described as dependable. When he got his first analyst position in Chicago, my parents helped with his rent deposit. When he wanted to upgrade cars, they co-signed. When he lost money on a bad investment, they called it a learning curve and doubled down on encouragement. When I asked if they could co-sign a modest business credit line so I could scale an early prototype I was building, my dad didn't even hesitate. Be realistic, he said. Tech startups are gambling. You've got a steady career. Don't throw it away chasing hype. Funny thing is, I wasn't gambling. I was working 14-hour shifts responding to car wrecks, overdoses, strokes. Watching coordination failures cost minutes that cost lives. I saw patterns, system breakdowns, delays that didn't need to happen, but to them, I was the kid they didn't have to worry about. That phrase followed me for years. We don't have to worry about Ethan. It meant they assumed I'd handle everything alone. They never asked what I was building. They never asked why I was exhausted, even on days off. They never asked what I was doing at 2 a.m. after getting home from a shift. They knew Blake's quarterly bonus projections down to the decimal. They couldn't tell you which station I worked out of. Being ignored doesn't make you weaker. Sometimes it makes you precise. While they were studying Blake's highlight reel, I was learning how to intubate in moving vehicles, how to stay calm while someone coded in the back of an ambulance, how to make decisions when seconds mattered, and somewhere between midnight dispatch calls and 4 a.m. highway runs, I started building something they would never see coming. Most people think night shifts are quiet. They're not. They're just darker. I worked out of Station 14 on the west side of the city, from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. My world was sirens, diesel fumes, and fluorescent hospital hallways, car pileups on frozen overpasses, cardiac arrests in cramped kitchens, overdoses in gas station bathrooms. Chaos has a rhythm if you stay in it long enough. And what I kept noticing wasn't just the emergencies, it was the gaps. Ambulances stacked outside ER bays because no one knew which trauma room was clear. Nurses scrambling because handoffs weren't logged correctly. Dispatch rerouting units blind because the system lagged behind real time by 10 minutes. 10 minutes is the difference between brain damage and walking out of a hospital. So during downtime, rare, fragmented, never predictable, I started sketching ideas in a black notebook I kept in my locker. A live coordination grid, real-time visibility across dispatch, field units, and ER intake, no blind spots, no guessing. I didn't tell anyone at home. There was no point. I teamed up with an old academy friend, Marcus Vega, who'd moved into software engineering after burning out in the field. He understood the problem because he'd lived it. We built the first rough prototype in my apartment kitchen. I'd get home at 8 a.m., shower off the smell of smoke and antiseptic, sleep 3 hours, then wake up and jump on video calls with Marcus. We debugged between protein bars and black coffee. We argued about server load and user interface while the rest of the world was eating dinner. Then, I'd put my boots back on and go save someone's life. For 2 years, that was my cycle. My parents knew 1% of it. To them, I worked nights. That translated to stable paycheck. Nothing headline-worthy. Meanwhile, Blake's life updates filled the family group chat like a press release. Promotions, conferences, networking dinners with men who wore watches worth more than my car. When I tried explaining what we were building once, my dad cut me off halfway through. "Sounds complicated," he said. "Just make sure it doesn't distract you from your real job." Real job. I stopped bringing it up after that. But the platform VectorFlow started working. Not perfectly, not beautifully, but enough. We secured a small pilot with a regional trauma center after months of cold emails and demo calls. I'd pitch from hospital parking lots between calls, still in uniform. Sometimes I muted myself to respond to dispatch. Marcus handled back-end architecture. I handled operational modeling and field integration. We didn't sleep much. There were nights I questioned everything. Nights when the code broke under stress tests. Nights when an investor call fell through and my bank balance looked thin enough to make anyone nervous. But I've pronounced time of death in living rooms at 3:17 a.m. Perspective changes when you've seen that. This wasn't ego. It was a fixable problem. And when the pilot hospital reported a measurable reduction in intake delays within the first month, something shifted. Word spread. Another hospital wanted a demo. Then a private emergency services network reached out. We weren't a hobby anymore. We were infrastructure. My family didn't notice the shift. They were busy planning Blake's promotion celebration. The call came in on a Tuesday at 2:12 a.m. We'd just cleared a rollover accident on I-90. I was sitting on the rear bumper of the ambulance, gloves off, staring at the steam rising from my breath in the cold air when my phone buzzed. Marcus. I almost ignored it. We had another dispatch pending. I answered anyway. They want to buy us. No build-up, no hype, just that. The medical systems company we'd been in quiet talks with out of Austin, the one that kept asking technical questions instead of financial ones, had reviewed our latest pilot metrics. They didn't want a minority stake. They didn't want advisory control. They wanted VectorFlow outright. The number he said next didn't register at first. 186 million. I didn't react. I've learned not to react quickly. I finished my shift. I drove home in silence. Over the next 10 days, my life split in two. In conference rooms with glass walls and polished tables, I reviewed contracts, NDAs, acquisition terms. In ambulances with flickering interior lights, I restarted hearts and monitored oxygen saturation. I signed the deal on a Thursday afternoon wearing the same navy jacket I wore to work. No designer suit, no entourage, just a pen and a steady hand. When the wire hit, the number didn't feel real. I opened my banking app in my truck and stared at the balance. After taxes, legal fees, equity distribution, there was still more than enough. Enough to change generations, enough to make noise. I closed the app. Then I drove to my shift, because someone still had chest pain in District 6. Someone still needed an IV line in a freezing parking lot. I didn't tell my parents. Not because I wanted to hide it, because I knew what would happen. They'd either minimize it, call it lucky timing, or they'd rewrite history and say they always believed in me. Both options felt dishonest, so when my mom called a week before Christmas and said, "We're doing a special dinner for your brother's promotion, you'll be there." Right, I said yes. And I decided something quietly. I wasn't going to announce it, I wasn't going to hint, I was going to sit at that table, let them run their script, Let Blake take his bows, and when the moment came when he made one of his usual comments about my steady little life, I'd drop the number. Not to humiliate him. Not even for revenge, just to end the story they'd been telling about me for 29 years. I drove the same truck I'd owned for 6 years. Paint chipped on the tailgate, heater slow to warm. Nothing about it suggested liquidity. That helped. My parents' house looked exactly like it always did in December. White string lights sagging slightly along the gutters. Plastic snowmen leaning in the yard. The wreath on the door still shedding pine needles onto the welcome mat. Some things never update. Inside, I could already hear Blake's voice carrying over classic rock and the clink of glassware. Confident. Animated. Center stage, my mom opened the door before I knocked twice. Ethan. Finally. Quick hug. One pat on my back, she leaned away and studied my face like she was checking mileage on a vehicle. You look tired. Still doing those overnight shifts? You can't keep running yourself into the ground like that. I'm good, I said. She nodded but wasn't really listening. Her attention drifted past me toward the driveway. Maybe expecting something flashier to pull up behind me. Blake's already here, she said. Big night for him. Of course it was. I stepped inside, took off my boots, and followed the noise into the living room. Blake stood near the fireplace holding a glass of red wine. Sleeves rolled just enough to show his watch. He was mid-story about a partner meeting. Something about projections and aggressive growth strategies. My dad sat in his recliner leaning forward like he was absorbing market secrets. When Blake saw me, he smiled the way people do when they're feeling generous. There he is, he said. Night shift hero. Hey, I replied. He pulled me into a quick, one-armed hug and clapped my shoulder harder than necessary. Still running lights and sirens while the rest of us build the economy. Something like that, he laughed. My dad chuckled with him. How's that software experiment going? Blake asked casually. Swirling his wine, still tinkering with your little dashboard thing. It's moving, I said. Just don't let it distract you from the real job, my dad added. You've always been steady. That's your strength. Steady. Translation predictable. My mom floated in with a tray of appetizers and touched Blake's arm. We're so proud of you, she said. Tonight is about celebrating everything you've worked for. I stood there, part of the furniture. Eventually I drifted into the kitchen, not because anyone asked, because it gave my hands something to do. I chopped vegetables, stirred gravy, checked the oven temperature like it required tactical precision. My phone buzzed once in my pocket. Marcus. You ready? I typed back. Yeah. When we finally sat down at the dining table, nothing had changed from childhood except the wine was more expensive. Blake was seated dead center along the long side of the table. My parents flanked him like board members. I ended up near the corner closest to the kitchen prime position for passing dishes and clearing plates. Some roles don't expire. My dad lifted his glass first. To Blake, he said. To the promotion. To the next level. To Blake, my mom echoed. Eyes bright, glasses clinked. I raised mine too. Blake leaned back slightly in his chair and glanced at me with a half smirk. So, Ethan, he said, cutting into the ham. You ever think about upgrading from the ambulance grind, I mean? Long term. You can't live off overtime forever. I'm doing fine, I said. He shrugged. Just saying, if you ever want a real shift, I might be able to get you in front of someone at the firm. Operations, logistics, something entry-level. Entry-level. I watched the candlelight flicker across the table, listened to my mom laugh at something Blake said about office politics, noticed how my glass got refilled after his. It was familiar. Predictable. Safe. Blake took another sip and added, and hey, if that little app of yours ever turns into something, maybe you can buy yourself a car that doesn't sound like it's dying? The table laughed. Not cruelly, not maliciously, just casually. That's the part that sticks. I felt the old reflex rise, the one that swallows the comment, smiles, deflects. The version of me that keeps the peace because it's easier. Instead, I set my fork down carefully, not loud, not dramatic, just deliberate. I let them finish their laughter. Let the moment breathe. Let Blake lean back comfortably into the assumption that he understood the entire room. Then my mom glanced at me, polite smile engaged. And you? Ethan, everything else the same. Not exactly, I said. Blake tilted his head. Oh, what changed? Did the app finally make $10? Small chuckle. That was the opening. I didn't rush it, didn't raise my voice. I looked at him directly and said, evenly. I sold the company. The laughter didn't stop all at once. It faded in layers. Blake smirked first. Okay, he said. For how much? And that's when the air shifted. Blake leaned back in his chair, still half smiling. Okay, he repeated. For how much? I held his eyes. 186 million. No emphasis, no performance, just the number. For a second, nothing moved. Then Blake laughed. Too loud, right? And I just bought a yacht. I'm not joking, I said. My mom's smile froze in place like it hadn't received the update yet. My dad blinked once, twice. Blake's grin thinned. Come on, he said. You don't just sell something for that kind of money. You still drive that truck. You still live in that shoebox apartment. If you had that kind of cash, we'd know. Why would you? I asked. Silence. You've never asked about my work, I continued. You assumed you understood it. My dad cleared his throat. Ethan. If this is some kind of stunt, it's not. Blake leaned forward now. Elbows on the table. The smirk was gone. Show me, he said. Show me something real. I didn't hesitate. I pulled out my phone, opened my banking app, and turned the screen toward him. I didn't display everything, just one account, enough zeros. My dad inhaled sharply. My mom's hand flew to her mouth. Blake stared at the screen like it had insulted him personally. This doesn't make sense, he muttered. You how? That word hung there. You, the dependable one, the background noise. I built something that solved a real problem, I said. People with authority saw the value. They paid for it. My mom finally found her voice. Why didn't you tell us? I locked the screen and slid the phone back into my pocket. You never really listened, I said. Blake shook his head slowly, like the room had tilted. You did this tonight, he said quietly. At my dinner? No, I replied. I just answered your question. And just like that, the gravity in the room shifted. The silence after that felt heavier than the number itself. My dad set his fork down carefully. Like sudden movements might make the moment worse. If this is real, he said slowly, why wouldn't you come to us first? I almost smiled at that. Come to you, I asked, like when I asked you to co-sign a credit line and you told me to be realistic. My mom flinched. That was different, she said quickly. We didn't understand what you were trying to do. You didn't try to, I replied. Blake pushed back in his chair slightly. Don't rewrite history, he said. You never explained it clearly. I did, I said. You just decided it wasn't serious. My voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. For years, I continued, every time I talked about vector flow, it was a hobby to you, a side project, something cute. Meanwhile, you memorized Blake's bonus structure like it was scripture. That's not fair, my dad snapped. We supported you, you supported him, I said, financially, emotionally, publicly. Blake's jaw tightened. I worked for what I have. I know you did, I said. That's not the point. Then what is he demanded? I leaned forward slightly, not aggressive, just steady. The point is, I never needed you to choose me first. I needed you to see me at all. That landed. My mom looked down at her hands. You were always fine, she said quietly. You never complained. I learned not to, I replied. Because it didn't change anything. Blake exhaled sharply. So what? You felt overlooked. Welcome to adulthood. This isn't about feelings, I said. It's about patterns, he scoffed. You always played it quiet. Like you were above the competition. I wasn't competing, I said. I just wanted space to exist without being compared. That's dramatic, he shot back. I looked at him for a long second. You asked how much I sold for, I said. Not what I built, not how it works, not who it helps. He didn't answer. You were worried about how it makes you look, I continued. That's the difference. My dad rubbed his temples. This isn't a courtroom. No, I said. It's 29 years of momentum. Blake stood up abruptly, chair scraping against the hardwood. So what now, he said. You drop a number and expect us to bow. I don't expect anything, I replied. That's the point. My mom's voice cracked slightly. It hurts that you didn't trust us. I looked at her. You didn't create space for trust, I said. Every time I tried to explain something outside the version of me you were comfortable with, you redirected. That's not true, she whispered. You can't name the hospital network I've worked with for the last 5 years, I said calmly. But you can list Blake's last 3 clients. She didn't argue. Blake crossed his arms. You did this tonight, he said again. You wanted to humiliate me. If your identity can't handle someone else succeeding, I said, that's not humiliation, that's exposure. His face flushed. You think I'm threatened by you? I held his stare. You are now. My dad stepped in then, voice firmer. Enough. He looked older in that moment. So what do you want, he asked me. It was the first honest question of the night. I want you to stop comparing us, I said. Stop minimizing my work. Stop assuming I'll absorb whatever dynamic makes this house comfortable. Blake laughed once. Hollow. So you're setting conditions now, yes? The word didn't shake. If you want access to my life, not my money, my life, I said. It's going to look different, and if we don't, Blake asked. I stood up slowly. Then, nothing changes, I said. Except I stop showing up to play the role you wrote for me. The room felt tight, pressurized. My mom's eyes were wet now. But she wasn't speaking. Blake looked like someone had pulled the floor out from under him, and he was still pretending to stand. You always acted like the victim, he muttered. I shook my head once. I never wanted the spotlight, I said. I wanted room. That hung there. For a moment. No one moved. Then I reached for my coat. I didn't rush, that's the part I'm proud of. I didn't slam a door, didn't raise my voice, didn't try to win the last word. I just picked up my coat from the hook by the hallway and slipped it on. Behind me. Chairs shifted. My mom said my name once. Soft. Unsure. My dad exhaled, like he'd just realized something expensive had broken. Blake didn't say anything. I walked past the Christmas tree, the same artificial one we'd had since I was 12. Past the stockings stitched with our names. Blake's slightly larger, stitched first, always centered. My reflection caught in the hallway mirror for a second. I expected to see anger. Instead, I saw control. Not cold, not cruel, just done. Ethan, wait. My mom called again, stepping closer this time. I turned. But I didn't move toward her. We just need time, she said. This is a lot. I gave you time, I replied. Years of it. My dad stood a few feet behind her, hands on his hips, searching for something to say that would fix everything in one sentence. There wasn't one. Blake finally spoke. Voice tight. You really going to walk out like this? Yes. You can't just drop that and disappear. I'm not disappearing, I said. I'm just not shrinking. That one landed harder than the number had. No one followed me to the door. I stepped outside into the cold air. It hit sharp and clean, like stepping into water after being in a crowded room too long. Behind me, through the door, voices started rising, low at first, then sharper. I didn't stop to listen. I walked to my truck, unlocked it, and sat behind the wheel for a second before starting the engine. It hurt. Of course it did. But underneath the hurt was something solid. For the first time in my life, I hadn't adjusted myself to keep the peace. I hadn't apologized for taking up space. I pulled away from the curb slowly, headlights cutting across the snow-dusted lawn. And I didn't look back. The silence started the next morning. No group text, no drive safe, no passive-aggressive memes from my mom pretending nothing happened, just quiet. I've worked scenes after house fires where everything is technically standing, but the air still smells like smoke. That's what it felt like. Something structural had shifted. You couldn't see the damage from the outside, but it was there. I didn't reach out, not because I was angry, because I meant what I said. My life didn't pause. The acquisition moved fast. Integration meetings, strategy calls, site visits to hospital networks that were rolling out vector flow across multiple counties. For the first time, I was in rooms where no one saw me as the steady one. They saw the architect. They asked about system latency and load capacity. They debated my projections. They challenged my scaling model. They looked at my brain first. That took some adjusting. I also did something I wouldn't have done 5 years ago. I booked therapy. Not because I was spiraling, not because I couldn't function, because I didn't want old habits sneaking into new rooms. I found a therapist who worked with first responders and executives. Someone who understood high-stress environments without turning everything into a self-help slogan. In our second session, he said something that stuck. When a family creates a golden child dynamic, he said, they don't just neglect one kid, they distort both. I didn't respond right away. He continued. The overlooked one learns self-reliance to the point of isolation. The favored one learns worth tied to performance. Neither is healthy long-term. That tracked. For me, being ignored built endurance. It also built distance. I didn't ask for help because I didn't expect it to be there. For Blake, being elevated built confidence. It also built pressure. If you're always first place, falling feels like death. I didn't fully understand that last part until mid-January. Blake called. I stared at his name on my phone longer than necessary before answering. Yeah. He cleared his throat. He didn't sound like himself. "Can you talk? I'm listening." There was a pause, not the arrogant kind, the uncertain kind. "You remember how I said you made me look stupid at work?" he asked. "I remember. Turns out I didn't need your help with that." He gave a short laugh that didn't carry humor. Over the next few minutes, he laid it out. He'd been riding the high of his promotion too hard, talking big, taking risks he hadn't earned yet, pushing decisions to prove he deserved the fast track. He misread a client brief, sent a proposal with outdated numbers, overcommitted on a timeline. Nothing illegal, just sloppy. "They're reassessing my trajectory," he said, "not firing me. But the fast track, it's gone." I didn't interrupt. "For the first time," he added quietly, "I don't know who I am if I'm not ahead." There it was. Performance withdrawal. "I'm not glad that happened," I said. "And I meant it." "Why are you telling me?" I asked. "Because..." He exhaled. "I think I get it. A little. What you meant. When you said you just wanted room," I leaned back against the wall in my office. "You could have figured that out without stepping on me," I said evenly. "I know." It wasn't defensive. It was simple. "Mom and Dad are not okay," he continued. "They're replaying everything. Dad barely talks. Mom keeps saying we missed it, that we missed you." That landed harder than I expected. "They don't need a speech," I said. "They need consistency." He was quiet. "You really not going to bail me out if things get worse?" he asked suddenly. "No," he let out a breath. "Okay?" No argument, no sarcasm. Just okay. A week later, my parents asked to meet. Neutral ground. Small cafe halfway between our places. They looked older. Not physically aged, just stripped of certainty. My mom didn't rush into apologies. My dad didn't lead with justification. They both listened first. That was new. My dad admitted he didn't understand what I built and defaulted to dismissing it because it made him feel behind. My mom admitted. She leaned into Blake's wins because they were easy to celebrate publicly. "We assumed you were fine," she said. "So we didn't look deeper." "I was fine," I said. "I just wasn't seen." They apologized. Not dramatically, not theatrically, directly. "I'm not ready to pretend it's fixed," I told them. "But this is a start," and I meant that too. We didn't hug it out in the cafe. That's important. There wasn't a cinematic reset, no swelling music, no sudden return to normal. There was coffee going cold between us, and 3 people trying to unlearn 29 years of habit. "I don't expect this to fix overnight," my dad said. He kept his hands flat on the table, like he didn't trust them to gesture. "But I need to say it clearly. I minimized you. Not because you weren't impressive, because I didn't understand you. And instead of asking questions, I leaned into what felt familiar. That tracked. He'd always respected what he understood." My mom's voice was softer. "I thought you were strong," she said. "Independent." I told myself you didn't need as much encouragement. That you were just steady. "I am steady," I replied. "That doesn't mean I don't notice patterns." She nodded. Eyes wet but controlled this time. "We should have asked more," she said. "Listened longer. We made it too easy to celebrate Blake and too easy to overlook you." There it was. Not an excuse, not a justification. Ownership. "I didn't let myself soften too quickly." "I appreciate you saying that," I told them. "But words aren't the repair. Behavior is." My dad gave a short nod. "Tell us what that looks like." So I did. "No more comparisons," I said. "Not subtle ones, not jokes, not 'your brother did this' as a reference point for anything I do." They agreed. "No financial assumptions," I continued. "I'm not a backup retirement plan. I'm not an emergency fund for bad investments. If I help, it's my choice, not obligation." Another nod. Slower this time. "And if I talk about my work," I said, "you listen, you ask questions, you don't pivot after 30 seconds. My mom actually managed a faint smile at that. "I can do that," she said. I believed she meant it. Blake joined us 20 minutes later. He looked different. Not broken, just less inflated. He didn't sit at the head of anything. Just took the empty chair beside my dad. "I owe you an apology," he said without preamble. I waited. "I've leaned on the dynamic," he continued. "I liked being first. I liked knowing where I stood. And yeah, sometimes I made sure I stayed there." That was more honest than I expected. "You laughed at my work," I said, not accusing, just stating. "I did," he admitted, "because I didn't get it. And because if it was serious, that meant you were serious. And that complicated the ranking." There it was again. Ranking. "We grew up in the same house," he added. "But we didn't grow up the same." "No," I said. We didn't. He leaned back slightly. I don't want to compete with you, he said. I don't even know if I want the path I've been chasing anymore. I just didn't know how to step off it. That sounded less like ego and more like fatigue. You don't have to step off it, I replied. You just have to own it. Silence settled. But it wasn't hostile. It was transitional. Over the next months, the change wasn't dramatic. It was incremental. My mom caught herself mid-sentence once during dinner. Blake's firm is she stopped. Sorry, that's not relevant to what you were saying. She corrected in real time. My dad asked me to walk him through how vector flow scaled across state lines. He didn't pretend to understand everything. He just asked. Blake stopped making jokes about my truck, and one evening, months later, he asked something I didn't see coming. Would you ever let me intern with your team, he said. Not as your brother. Just someone starting over. I studied him for a long second. You'd start at the bottom, I said. No shortcuts, I know. You'd report to people younger than you, that's fine. No last name leverage, he nodded once. Okay, I said. Then, maybe. It wasn't sentimental, it was earned. We didn't become a perfect family. We became a more honest one. That's harder and better. Here's what I understand now. Family favoritism doesn't just bruise one kid, it reshapes everyone in the house. The overlooked one learns to operate without applause, learns to solve problems alone, learns not to ask twice. That can build strength. It can also build walls. The favored one learns that love feels loud when they're winning and uncertain when they're not. They start performing for oxygen. They confuse identity with momentum. Both are distortions. For years, I thought being ignored made me smaller. It didn't. It made me self-contained. But self-contained isn't the same as healed. Standing up at that dinner table wasn't about money. The number just made it impossible to dismiss me. What mattered was refusing to keep playing a role that didn't fit anymore. Boundaries aren't punishment. They're structure. They tell people where you end and they begin. And if you don't set them, someone else will draw the lines for you. I didn't walk away from my family because I hated them. I walked away from the version of myself that kept shrinking so the room would stay comfortable. Worth isn't assigned when someone finally notices you. It isn't granted by applause. It isn't validated by comparison. It exists long before recognition shows up. My parents overlooking me didn't erase what I built. Blake standing in the spotlight didn't diminish it. All that changed was when the truth entered the room. If you're the steady one, the quiet one, the one they don't have to worry about. Understand something. You're not background noise. You're not second place. And you don't need a stage to prove you exist. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do isn't winning. It's refusing to stay invisible. At Revenge Red, we focus on telling powerful, emotionally grounded stories that reflect real-life dynamics many people quietly experience but rarely talk about. This story is a fictional narrative, created for educational and reflective purposes, while the characters and events are imagined. The themes: family favoritism, emotional neglect, identity tied to performance, and the importance of boundaries are very real issues that affect countless households. Our goal is not to promote revenge for the sake of ego or humiliation. It's to highlight growth, to show what happens when someone chooses self-respect over silent resentment, when hard conversations replace comfortable patterns, when accountability becomes possible because someone finally stops shrinking. Family systems shape us, but they do not define our final form. Through stories like this, we aim to encourage healthier communication, emotional awareness, and long-term repair rather than short-term vindication. If this story resonated with you, take it as a reminder. Boundaries are not betrayal, success is not aggression, and being overlooked does not mean being lesser. Thank you for watching and engaging with Bear Reddit.